You're in the Danaan wing of the Louvre, surrounded by tourists. On the wall in front of you hangs a painting that 3 million people have admired over the last 14 months. Critics called it the find of the decade. The museum paid 4.2 million euros for it. You painted it in a basement in Amsterdam in 11 days. And right now, while a guide explains in French that the brushwork reveals the direct influence of Rembrandt, your phone vibrates. A message from your partner. 2 words, they know. But that's the end. Let's go back to the beginning, when you were still painting under your own name and nobody paid the slightest attention to you. You're 26 years old and living in a 30 square meter studio in Amsterdam that smells of turpentine and damp. You graduated with honors in fine arts from the Rijksakademie, one of the best art schools in Europe. Your technique is flawless. You can copy a Vermeer so well that a professor can't tell which is which. But nobody wants your original paintings. Your first solo exhibition was in a small gallery in the Jordan district. You invited 40 people. 6 showed up, including your mother. You sold 1 painting for 300 euros to the gallery owner who lent you the space. Out of pity. At night you work restoring paintings in a private workshop. Your boss is an old restorer who smells like solvent and has nails permanently stained with ochre. He teaches you things they don't teach at university. How to identify 17th century pigments by touch. How to age varnish with heat so it looks 300 years old. How to crack paint to simulate the passage of time. You think you're learning restoration. In reality, you're learning how to forge, only you don't know it yet. One afternoon, an art dealer visits the workshop. He sees a copy you made of a Rembrandt as an exercise. He stares at it in silence for half a minute. If I didn't know the original was in the Rijksmuseum, I'd swear this was real. You take it as a compliment. He takes it as a business opportunity. His name is Leon. Belgian, 58, Italian suits, a watch worth more than your entire studio. He invites you to dinner at a restaurant where the menu has no prices and explains something that changes the way you think. The art market works like this. 90% is trust and 10% is talent. If an expert says a painting is authentic, nobody questions it, because questioning it would mean saying the expert is an idiot. And experts never admit that. His proposal, he doesn't want you copying famous paintings, that's for amateurs. He wants you to paint new works by Dutch masters that never existed, but fit perfectly into a painter's catalog. You say no. You go back to your studio. You look at your paintings stacked against the wall. 3 months of unpaid rent. 340 euros in your account. You call Leon. Leon introduces you to the third piece of the team, Hannah, a German chemist, 34 years old, working in a conservation lab in Berlin. And her specialty is making a painting that's 3 weeks old look 3 centuries old. Low-temperature ovens running for entire days to dry layers of oil paint. Damar resin dissolved in turpentine to imitate old varnish. A leather roller with an irregular pattern that creates cracks identical to the craquelure produced by real time. And this is what makes her brilliant. She scrapes the inside of antique frames with a scalpel and mixes that dust into the final varnish. If a microscope analyzes the surface of the painting, it finds real 17th century dirt, because it is. But the trick holding everything together isn't the painting or the aging process. It's what they call provenance, the ownership history of a painting. Without history, a work is worth nothing. Leon has a system for inventing it. He buys auction catalogs from the 1940s, the period when millions of paintings were stolen or scattered during World War II. He inserts a fake reference to the painting, a typed line using a period typewriter that says something like Lot 47, interior with figure, attributed to P. de Hooch, von Waldstein Collection, Prague, 1943. He prints the page on aged paper and rebinds it into the original catalog. Now your painting has documented history going back 80 years. The first job is an unpublished Peter de Hooch. Leon brings you an authentic 17th century canvas bought at a village auction for 400 euros. Hannah prepares the pigments using period recipes: lead white, real lapis lazuli ground by hand, sienna ochre. Nothing that didn't exist 350 years ago. If a lab analyzes this painting, it can only find 17th century materials, because there are only 17th century materials. 3 weeks of painting. It sells to a private collector in Zurich for 320,000 euros. Your share is 80,000, more than you made in 4 years signing your own name. You pull off 3 to 4 operations a year. Each painting sells for between 200,000 and 800,000 euros. You never repeat a buyer. Never 2 works by the same painter in the same year. Only second-tier painters whose catalogs have gaps where a lost work could plausibly fit. And then, on the 4th job, what had to happen sooner or later happens. A German collector who bought a supposed Jan Steen for 450,000 euros decides to donate it to a museum in Munich. Before accepting the donation, the museum analyzes it with X-rays. They discover traces of another painting underneath from the 19th century. You had scraped down a 19th century canvas to reuse the fabric and hadn't cleaned it thoroughly enough. Traces remained. Leon calls you at 6 in the morning. The museum is asking questions. Your stomach drops. But Leon has been doing this for 30 years and acts fast. He contacts the collector and tells him he himself had doubts about the piece and that he'll refund the money in full immediately. The collector accepts without protest. He'd rather lose the painting than end up in the newspapers as the idiot who paid $500,000 for a forgery. The painting disappears. You burn it in a barbecue in Hannah's garden in Berlin on a Saturday afternoon. 450,000 euros turn to ashes in 20 minutes while Hannah flips sausages on the grill next to it as if it were a normal afternoon. From that day on, the protocol changes. Every painting goes through your own X-rays before it leaves the workshop. Never again does a work leave without being clean. You've been at it for 4 years, with 12 paintings spread across private collections and minor museums throughout half of Europe. When Leon arrives with the proposal that changes everything, the Louvre is looking for 17th century Dutch works to expand its collection, not a provincial museum. The Louvre. Hannah says it's madness. If we get caught fooling a neighborhood gallery, it's 2 years. If we get caught fooling the Louvre, it's 15, and we end up in every newspaper on the planet. Leon convinces her with the number, between 3 and 5 million. You agree, but not for the money. You agree because you want revenge. The art world ignored you for years. Your original work meant nothing to them. Now you want to hang in the most important museum in the world. You want the brightest experts on the planet to look at your work and say it's genius. And you want to know it yourself, even if no one else ever does. You choose Carl Fabricius. Rembrandt's student, he died young in the explosion of a gunpowder magazine in Delft in 1654. Only 16 of his paintings survive in the entire world, so few that discovering a new one would be believable. And between 1649 and 1650, there are no records of his activity, an empty year in which he could have painted anything. You buy a worthless 17th century painting at a rural auction for 600 euros. You scrape it with a scalpel for 4 days until only the original canvas remains. Now you have a support that passes any carbon-14 test. Hannah prepares the pigments. Afghan lapis lazuli for the blue, the same mineral they used in Delft. Pure lead for the white, burned bone for the black. If a lab analyzes any square inch, it will only find materials from 1650. 11 days painting, 4 hours of sleep. You're not copying a style. You're thinking like Fabricius, how he organized light, where he placed the weight of the composition, what mistakes he made, because a perfect painting raises suspicion. Imperfections are what convince. You leave a slightly crooked brushstroke in the lower left corner, calculated to the millimeter to look accidental. Hannah ages the painting for 3 weeks. Oven at 50 degrees. Layers of old varnish. Crake lure with the leather roller. Dirt from 370 years packed into every crack with a toothbrush. Leon constructs the provenance. A Czech aristocratic collection destroyed in the war. A Swiss dealer in the 1950s. A chain of fictitious owners leading up to a Geneva collector wishing to sell discreetly. Evaluation by an independent expert in The Hague. Authenticity confirmed. Second evaluation in Paris. Confirmed. Pigment analysis, 17th century. Canvas analysis, 17th century. X-rays, clean. Provenance, documented since 1943. The Louvre offers 4.2 million euros. Leon closes the deal. Your share, 1.4 million. 3 months later, you go to Paris, alone. You pay 17 euros for admission like any other tourist. You walk to the Denon wing, and there it is, your painting. With a plaque that says Carl Fabricius, portrait of a young man with turban, circa 1650. A couple takes a photo in front of it. A group of students listens to a guide explain the delicate influence of Rembrandt in the brushwork. You hear that and feel something you can't describe. Your best work, the best museum in the world. And your name is nowhere, nor will it ever be. That night, Leon calls you at the hotel. He wants another painting, this time for the British Museum. You tell him the Louvre was the last one. Leon laughs. The last one? There is no last one. We've just proved we can fool anyone. This is only the beginning. He hangs up and you understand there is no way out. If you retire, Leon knows enough to destroy you. If you continue, every new painting increases the chances of getting caught. You agree to one more, a sketch attributed to Van Dyck for a collection in London. But something has changed in you. You're paranoid. You convince yourself someone is following you when you go out to buy materials. You check the locks on the workshop 3 times. You drink to sleep. Hannah makes her first mistake in years. The varnish on the Van Dyke cracks irregularly. It doesn't look like natural craquelure. It looks like what it is. You have to repaint entire sections and age them again. You lose 2 months. And then comes the news that freezes your blood. A researcher at the University of Delft, a Fabricius specialist, publishes an article mentioning the Louvre's recent acquisition and announces that he has requested permission to study it using a pigment analysis technique that didn't exist when you painted the picture. At the same time, a restorer at the Louvre itself performs a routine cleaning of your work and finds something that shouldn't be there. A microparticle of phthalocyanin blue, a synthetic pigment that wasn't invented until 1935. An invisible speck of dust that fell from another painting you were restoring in your workshop and stuck to the varnish while it dried. A particle weighing less than an eyelash. Leon has a contact inside the museum who warns him. The phone vibrates. They know. Now we're back where the video began. Emergency meeting in a rented apartment in Brussels. Hannah wants to flee to South America. Leon wants to fix it from the inside. You haven't slept for 3 nights and can't stop thinking that a dust particle weighing nothing is going to destroy everything. Leon discovers that the restorer hasn't yet submitted the report to management. He's waiting for a second opinion before escalating the issue. Leon arranges for that second opinion to come from someone who owes him a favor. He doesn't ask him to lie, he asks him to interpret. The modern particle could have reached the painting during some later restoration, not during the original creation. It's a plausible explanation because the work supposedly passed through several restoration workshops over 70 years. Final report: probable post-creation contamination. The painting stays on the wall. You go to Brussels to see Leon in person. You tell him you're out. Leon doesn't get up from his armchair. Nobody gets out of this. You know too much about me. I know too much about you. We need each other to stay quiet. You leave that meeting knowing the only way out is for one of the 2 of you to disappear. You return to Amsterdam. You try to paint your own work. You can't. Every time you pick up a brush, you think of that Fabricius hanging in the Dienenwing and feel a sick pride mixed with terror. The combination paralyzes you. 2 years after your retirement, a Dutch newspaper publishes an investigation into art forgeries. A painting you sold 5 years earlier to a museum in Cologne was analyzed using the new dating technique. It's fake. The police start pulling the thread. The dealer in Zurich. The fabricated provenance. The manipulated 1940s catalogs. They arrest Leon in Brussels. You find out on television while eating breakfast. You see his face on the screen and your coffee freezes in your mouth. 48 hours of silence. Then your lawyer calls. Arrest warrant. Leon negotiated a reduced sentence in exchange for naming names. Yours was the first one out of his mouth. They arrest you on a Tuesday at 6 in the morning. 6 officers at the door of your studio. They handcuff you in front of your 70-year-old neighbor who has spent a decade believing you're an art restorer. Hannah falls in Berlin a week later. The trial is a spectacle. The prosecution presents 12 fake paintings. 12 works spread across museums and collections in 6 countries. Total damage, 11.3 million euros. The Louvre Fabricius is the star of the case. The prosecutor projects it on a screen before the jury. This work deceived the best experts on the planet for more than 3 years. Leon gets 3 years for cooperating. Hannah, 4. You, who gave up no one, get 6 years and a fine of 2.8 million that you will never be able to pay. You leave the courtroom in handcuffs. A journalist shouts at you from behind the barrier. Do you consider yourself an artist or a criminal? And you don't know what to answer. Because your best work, the one 3 million people admired, the one the best critics in the world praised, hung for 14 months in the most important museum on the planet. But it will never bear your name. You signed it as Karel Fabricius. And that's the most twisted part of all. You're good enough to be in the Louvre. It's just that nobody will ever know. That was all. Leave me a comment if you want more stories from the art world. See you.